Welcome back to the Shaun Trey Show. I have a really fun guest with me tonight. Now, would you like to introduce yourself and tell people who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So thank you for having me. And my name's Shaun
Awesome.
Kelly. I have a studio called Raw Technique Studios, and I have a website, hiphopaudioschool.com, and I'm a hip hop mixing engineer. I do courses, I do YouTube videos, and it's just all in the hip hop world.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I found you. I was looking on. I was actually looking for some information on recording styles and mixing techniques, and one of your videos popped up, and I was like, this is awesome, because there's so much information. I love the internet, but there's so much information that at times I don't know where to look.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I have to kind of do is to kind of go through kind of a checklist for my filter for, is something like really, really helpful. And one of the things that I find is really interesting is like, can a video help me get from point A to point B? Like for me, that's like the most important thing.
Right.
Like if whatever it is, the task that I'm getting to, can this help me get to here? And that was one of the things that I felt was really clear in your videos that I really liked, and one of the reasons I reached out.
That's awesome, man. Thanks for watching my video.
No worries, brother. Now, how did you get into, like, because you got a bunch going on. Let's start with, how did you get into music? Let's start with that.
Well, I started playing guitar when I was 14, and I just loved like Metallica and Slayer and stuff like that. So I used to just want to learn all the solos and like how to just play. And that's what got me into music in the beginning. And then it just went from there, and it just like changed so much throughout the years. But I still love heavy metal.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
That's awesome. I was going to say, like, so you're running, a hip hop school, and you're doing a lot of hip hop mixing, but yet you have this deep love for, which to me, like, it's not mutually exclusive. You can like whatever you like, that's the beauty of it. You know what I mean? But like, when did you start getting into hip hop then?
It was probably, I started listening to hip hop when like Eminem's first album came out, and Dre's 2001 was out and all that. So I was listening to it back then. I think it kind of, the genres kind of mixed together with like Slipknot having that like rap style. And then it went like into like Limp Bizkit and stuff like that. And I feel like
Limp Bizkit popped into my mind about something that's kind of like in middle of the road. You know?
So like, I think I like kind of just went that route while staying with the other like rock and metal route. So it just split off, and I ended up, I like everything really. Like if it's a good song, it's a good song. So
I'm with you entirely. Like if it's good music, it's good music. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Wherever it comes from. Well, that's really cool. Now, how did you begin your career in, working in behind the scenes with music? How did you get into that?
So I went into school trying to do guitar as my major, since I was like, I play guitar, that's what I'll do. And then I took a class. So I applied to Cal Poly Pomona, and I applied really late, so I didn't get in that first year. So I had to wait an entire year, and I was like, well, I don't want to just sit around. So I went to Pasadena City College to take a couple of classes. And one of the classes was a music class, and the title of the class was something completely different than what they taught. And it ended up being like Pro Tools 101 type of class. And that's when I was just like,
awesome.
I was like, this is so cool. So I ended up saying, all right, I'm going to do engineering instead, because I just fell in love with like using Pro Tools and how to like capture recordings and all that stuff. So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
I was, over the pandemic, we had built a home studio here for my wife. My wife's a famous singer here in Vietnam. She was the first winner of Vietnam Idol.
Oh, nice.
And it's pretty cool. And so we did a lot of stuff on our own. And right before COVID hit, I just was like, we should build out a small home studio just so that you can kind of create on your own when you want to. You feel inspiration. We don't have to book a place for you to go in. You can just drop in and record some vocals. And, if you need help, I'll study some software and learn how to do stuff, So we put things together, and then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And we didn't have access to get out and go to anything. So I kind of deep dove, and I learned a couple different softwares. I learned Pro Tools. I learned Studio One, because one of our mix engineers that we likes to use also uses Studio One, so it's just easier to send him project files in there. And so it's like, but one of the things was, it was just really interesting that like I dove into this whole new world that was just like, it's really fun.
Yeah,
I was I was recording my wife's vocals tonight, and I absolutely love it, because it's not just about the recording technique. It's also about like, you get to be this person that shapes this track. You get to shape it. You get to, certainly the vocalist, the singers, the musicians are really important, but people don't understand how important the mix tech is, the audio engineer is, because you create the sound on that track.
Oh yeah. Like, it's crazy because like every engineer will have a different sound, like when it comes to mixing the song, to where that's why it's a lot of people will find an engineer and just stick with them because they like that sound. And I mean, you could have another engineer get quality. It's just the style is always a little bit different. Yep.
And that was like, I sent a song recently to one guy, and he's awesome. But he brought it back, and the reverb was just like, he loved his reverb, and it was like, it was really deep throughout the track, and it wasn't what I was looking for, but it was nice. It sounded great, but it was different than the sound, and it's really special. Now, what is it that you've been doing that, and you studied Pro Tools. How did you then get into having your own studio? How did that come about?
In college, when we were taking all the like classes and everything, in school at Pasadena, I was using Pro Tools, but I was like, I can't afford Pro Tools on my own yet. So I ended up using, SonarWorks was, I think, or not SonarWorks. That's a software. Sonar, I think is what it was called. And it was just like a cheaper DAW. So I started messing with that and like recording random stuff. And then, eventually I got my hands on Pro Tools and just like took off from there. And it was just like, hey, I want to record. So I would hit up people that I was working at, like Raging Waters at the time, and doing like all kinds of stuff like
San
that.
Dimas.
Yeah. And I was just like, hey, anybody sing or do anything? Like, I want to record you. So I would just record everybody. Like, I was doing stuff for free, trying to just like get my hands on as much as I can to get more familiar with it. And then I opened up like a studio in a bedroom in the house, and that's when I started getting into hip hop, because I had some friends who are getting into recording hip hop, because I had some friends that would rap, and I was like, hey, let's do it. And then that's where I was like, oh, this is where a lot of people are. And like hip hop was just something that it was so much easier than trying to record an entire drum set and having the guitarist and the bass player and everything in one bedroom. So it's like I needed to focus on vocals, and that's where the hip hop thing really took off, is because I had a lot of access to hip hop artists.
That's awesome, man. It's something that like, I've found that some of the best opportunities in my life happen just not by accident, but by opportunity of what was there. Yeah. And then like the whole thing just panned out from that. Did you feel like that was kind of how things kind of unfolded for you with the hip hop?
Yeah. Cause it was what a lot of people were doing at the time, and they're the ones coming into the studio. And I ended up really enjoying it, because I was also like starting to write my own beats and everything. And I was like, all right, this kind of like fits together perfect. And then it was awesome, because like I recorded one female hip hop artist, and she happened to know everybody. And so after I recorded her, I wasn't like posting anything. I was just like, oh, that was cool. And then all of a sudden people are like, hey, you have a studio in West Covina? Like, can we record? And I was like, all right, yeah. And that's where it just started growing.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's some of the best thing too, is I don't think enough people understand that you put yourself out there and good things will come. You just have to got to keep up the solid work. But like, the reality is there was this interesting thing that was, what was it? There's this really cool, good book on success called Barking Up the Wrong Tree by Eric Barker. If you haven't read it, you got to read it. I plug it all the time. The guy is amazing. And one of the things he talks about is that there are like super networkers.
Mm.
And so like, and you might not always meet them. Like sometimes you meet someone and this guy knows one other person, and then you meet this guy and he introduces you to one other person. But there might be that one person that you meet who then introduces you to 40 people. Right. But like, you don't know who that person's going to be. You know what I mean? But you just have to be ready.
Right. And I guess that's the benefit of, like, I still tell people on my channel and stuff, like, if you can do free work in the beginning to build up your portfolio, which is one benefit. And then the other benefit is you're practicing. And then also you're building up like all these people that are coming in, and they're going to know people, and they're going to know people, and so on. And like, I still have one artist that still, like, I haven't offered recording in years, and he still hits me up like, hey, can I get into a recording session? Like, he still just wants to come back. And I'm like, it's been years since I've done that, but I have let him come back a couple times just because he's so persistent. So.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's one of the beautiful things too. Like, I still like I offer people all the time, especially people that I've worked with, you know, or I'm always like, if you need, I'm always the type where I will tell someone, if you need any help, like, just tell me, ask me, because I know, you know, it's like, you know, thank you, Justin Timberlake, what goes around comes around. You know what I mean? It's true though. You know what I mean? It's like, if you put good vibes out there, if you put that good connectivity out there, man, stuff always comes back. It always comes back to you.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just being patient.
Right? No, that was going to become my next question. My next question is like, what else do you think is really important for you when you start working with people?
Like currently or back then?
Let's start with back then and then move into currently.
Yeah. So like back then it was like I was trying to keep up. So like, I wanted to make sure I was good enough to be able to not hold up a session or anything like that. So I think that's something where you're doing, you're helping out the artist by being good enough. And if you practice enough, like that's why I didn't like charging in the beginning. So I was like, I'm going to give you a free session, and this is for me to practice. And if you like it, cool. If not, I'm still practicing. So like, that was my way of doing it.
And that's tough, man. Because I remember like the first couple of sessions I recorded for my wife, and she's looking at me like,
yeah.
You know, right. I don't know what I'm doing right now, man.
Right.
You know, give me a second. I don't understand anything.
Yeah.
But you know, after there's a point that you hit that you're just like, okay, I got this. You know, your knowledge level hits a certain point. Your familiarity with your software hits a certain point. Pro Tools doesn't look like this scary, terrifying thing anymore. Suddenly it's like something that you can make sense of.
Right.
Now, what are some of the important things that you find now for your business? What are some of the things that are really important for you now?
I think it's just like trying to really go with what the artist wants, like with the song. So a lot of the artists I mix are returning clients. So like we know, all right, for this artist, he doesn't like mid-range in his vocals. So I always make sure to not put a lot of mid-range on his vocals, because every single time I try to change it up, he'll be like, hey, my vocals have that weird mid-range sound again. And I'm like, all right, let me back it off. So like, it's like a thing, like just trying to remember what artists like and like their style. Some artists, they're just like, do what you want, I'll like it. And then other artists are very, very particular. So just like, knowing what they like and sticking to it. So
that's a really interesting point. And I never thought about that from the mix engineer's perspective, but like when I as a vocalist, when I will sing with my wife and I'll put something out there and something comes back and I'm like, for me, I like brighter vocals. I like something that's got, you know, a little bit EQ'd up toward the higher end.
Right.
And, you know, that just a vibe that I like. That's a totally interesting point that people have their own unique sound that they like.
Yeah. And
now,
some are,
how do you, go ahead,
I was just going to say, some are very, very particular on that. And some are just like, like how you said, like, oh, I just like my vocals a little bit more bright on the top end. Like that's nice and easy to work with. But some are like, okay, I want it very, very particular. So, it gets really different for artists.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you have to sit there and kind of like, do some of the artists like to sit in the room with you while you're mixing, or, you know, or most people kind of just sit back and let you do it?
I don't have anybody come into the studio. It's all just They send me the stuff, send me their song.
That's
I
awesome.
work on it and then go from there. A lot of people will have like a rough mix that they want me to like, hey, I want the same delays as this rough mix. I want the same like vibe, but just make it sound better and add your own like taste to it. So,
which is got to be such a difficult thing. Make it sound better, and it's just
yeah. I mean,
totally.
I guess like for me, I pretty much I take the effects that they like, and then I just scrap everything else and start from scratch and build up my own vocal chains and like for the instruments and everything. And then just put back in like, all right, they wanted this delay. They wanted this reverse reverb swell in the beginning. They wanted this beat drop here. And then I'm like, okay, so now I have my normal quality with your effects mixed into it. And then that's usually what people are happy with.
That's a really awesome perspective. Is like you're looking for the characteristics that they like, but then you know what's going to get you the quality that you need.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
That's an awesome way to put it together. No, and that's really interesting because kind of the way you're explaining things to me is very much like an educator. And that's kind of the cool part too, is like you have that educator vibe. So how did you then get into, what was that thing that said, hey, maybe I should start teaching other people how to do this? How did that come through?
So in the very beginning of my YouTube channel, which I want to say was 2013, that was the year I also graduated college. And I was like, I want to, as I'm learning this stuff and putting together my own studio, I want to document it in a way that helps me learn it. Because I feel like if you teach somebody something, you're going to know it better. So that's why I started doing it. I was like, oh, I just learned this really cool thing. Let me document it. So one, I can remember it, and I have a video I could always go back to and be like, oh yeah, that's how I did it. Or also other people could be like, oh, that's cool. Now I could implement it. So it was just like a win-win. So that's why I started my YouTube channel. That's awesome. Just share what I was learning along the way.
That's really awesome. There was this great quote by this ancient Greek teacher, a Roman teacher, I believe it was Seneca, and it was like in ancient antiquity, and he says, "As we teach, we learn." And it's something that I've always thought was really interesting. Is like you find it when you. I am a black belt in judo, and I came up learning martial arts. And one of the funny things is I learned the techniques coming up, but I didn't always understand them until I'd had to teach them. And when I taught them, I was like, that's how that works. And it kind of would like be this little, this click, and you're like, oh, wow, that makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah.
But it was one of the interesting things that you pointed out. Like, you get all this extra information as you're teaching and you're putting it out there. Now, what were some of the challenges as you were growing your YouTube channel? What were some of the things that you ran into as you were building that out?
I feel like I didn't really have a goal for it in the beginning, so I didn't really think about I didn't think about it doing anything. I thought I was just gonna have videos that I would rewatch for myself, but it ended up growing after like pretty early on. I put out one was like how to put together a home studio, and then the other was like how to mix rap vocals like a pro, and those were the two videos that just like took off and have like a lot of views, and that's what a lot of my channel grew from early on. And it was a surprise to me, and that's when I was like, oh man, this is actually gonna be something. So that's when the pressure came on, and I was like, all right, let's put out a bunch of videos. And I made my first like course, because I was like, okay, people like this free information, let's see if they'll be interested in like a more detailed course. So that's when I made my first course on like how to mix a hip hop song using stock plugins inside of Pro Tools. And that was the first course I put out, and it did pretty good. Then I just grew from there, trying to follow that same, put out a video, make a course type thing.
That's really awesome. Now, did you find that it was, how can I ask this? As you started growing your business, did everything kind of feed into each other? So like, your YouTube videos would then feed your courses, but were they bringing you artists as well to come record at your studio?
Yeah. So early on, the recording side, I switched over to mixing only like pretty quick, because I was like, I was recording a lot of people are coming into the house, and it just like, I don't know. I didn't like the whole I have to be here at a certain time and do this. Like I didn't like the restrictions of a schedule. Yeah. So I was like, you know what? Let me focus on the part that I really, really like, and that's the mixing side of it. So that's when I started building up like more of a mixing clientele. And from the YouTube videos, it did bring in a lot of mixing work. So that's still like, I don't advertise my mixing service through ads or anything like that. I simply just like, hey, if you guys want to work, like hit me up. And that's how I get all of my mixing clients. It's all just from YouTube videos.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's really awesome. Well, that's a good point. Like you were able to recognize what wasn't for you. Like for me, I love capturing the vocals. I love getting people in, and I love working almost like I feel like I'm holding the hand of the singer, just really working this. For me, like I grew up with a mom who's a psychologist. And, and I've always, and early in my career, while I was coming up with learning film and doing acting and stuff, I was also teaching, and I was teaching children English. Okay. And so for me, I've always been really good with like kids, and like it's okay. Mm-hmm. And I feel like when you get most of adults, when you get them into a recording studio, they're losing their mind. You get your occasional person who's just got it all together, but there's a lot of people that deal with insecurities. Did that sound good? Are you sure? Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, man, come on, let's go again. Don't worry about it. We can comp those vocals. Right? we can mix that all and mash it all together. So don't stress too much. But it's really interesting that you were able to identify what you were. Was it something that you were stronger at, or is it something that you just liked more? Because those aren't always the same thing.
I think I just liked it more, and that's why I became stronger at it. Is like the recording side was fun, and I like to be able to like capture and have control over the sound, because I hate when I get vocals that are like recorded in a untreated room and sound like they were recorded in a bathroom, or they're clipping or something like that. I'm like, oh, I wish I was recording it so I could have it how I want it. But as long as people get a decent quality, then that's where I'm just like, all right, cool. Now I have a clean slate to just really dive into the mix. And I feel like you could do so much in the mixing stage, and like there's so much opportunity to sound different than another person compared to the recording stage. I felt like it was just like get quality, and then you get to have fun in the mix.
Yeah. Well, it's a really interesting point. Like that one thing you brought up is really interesting. I'm going to be interviewing these two really awesome women from Australia that are creating their own mobile studio, because one of the challenges they had, and so they're converting like an old Airstream, like the old like all metal, trailer campers. Yeah. So these ladies are converting this Gulfstream into a mobile recording studio. And so they're just lining the whole thing, putting in, things, so that the idea is that they can go anywhere around Australia, even to like remote areas, and just pop up and like help people record. That's awesome. Kind of to make it accessible. It's super awesome. And I was like, dude, that's awesome. Like awesome tech, that's kind of cool. Right. But because one of the things they found too is that one of the major challenges with home studios is that, you're getting these situations where people might get close, but they're not getting it, it's still, there's enough problems with it. It's just hard to give a good mix. Right. And so that was kind of one of the things they're tackling. Now, when you go about, how do you approach a mix? I'm an artist, I send you a song. What are some of the steps that you take to approach that track to get it from here to a finished piece? How do you go at that?
I start with if I get a reference track from them, like a rough mix, or say they have, I like this Drake song, I want to sound similar to this, then that's where I have like a goal to try to get to. But I always start the same. I just organize the session, get my levels right, start cleaning up. I tend to start with vocals. Very recently, I started experimenting with getting the instruments all set and then putting the vocals. But I do tend to start vocals, get them nice and clean, build up kick drum, bass, snare, get all that wrapped around the vocals. And then once all of that's in there, then I start, all right, let's see how reverbs start working with everything, and then delays and putting all the like fun effects on there. go through the mastering stage of it, and then that's when I'm listening to reference tracks, trying to get them to sound as close as possible to the vibe that they're going with. I know it's never going to be exactly the same, and I really hope the artist knows that too, because some artists are like, I want it to sound exactly like this. I'm like, well, then you need to go in that exact same studio on the exact same day, use the exact same equipment, and sound exactly like that person. So there's no way it's going to happen. But
that's one of the things too. Like even like when I'll tell my wife, like, when we're recording a song, I try to get through, say we're doing our main vocals. Well, we need to do that in one day. We need to do that in one sitting, because if she comes back the next day, she could sound completely different. There's going to be a different tonal quality. Mm-hmm. Maybe she sits slightly in a different position next to the mic. It's really like, there's a dramatic variations that you can get just from stuff like that. And people don't understand that. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sure from your position, must be tricky. Yeah.
I mean, I just want them to, the artist to know, like, there's no way to completely copy the sound of another artist.
Yeah.
So like you could get the vibe, and that's what I want, like, to emphasize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you go about getting that same vibe or approaching a vibe?
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you can do?
I just posted a video on my YouTube channel all about referencing, and that's the number one thing is, like, if you want to capture the vibe of a song, then you have to reference it and go back and forth between your mix and that mix. And you just listen for what's the difference. Like, are the vocals sitting a little bit higher in the mix, or are they tucked into the beat a little bit more? Is the 808 hitting a certain way? Like, is it loud and big, or is it kind of more crunchy and just like hitting it at a certain level? So I listen to every single part of the mix and then try to implement that into my mix. So that way it captures that same vibe of the song. It has the same level differences between vocals and beat and all that. So
that's really awesome. It's one of the things too, like, that's really that you're touching on too, is like when you're working with a reference track, there's I want to figure out how I'm going to say this. So when a lot of people approach music, you don't think the lay person, the average person, is not going to. I took a class when I was starting to learn some of this music stuff from Berklee College of Music. Mm-hmm. One of the concepts was how to listen. And I was like, come on, man. What do you mean how to listen?
Yeah.
It's like, I know how to listen. I listen to music. It's fun. It sounds good. But it's like, no. Like, there's a whole art to listening. And it's like, because there's this one great story about how people from one part of Alaska have just a ton of 30 words for snow. But, or ice, and then here in Vietnam, where I live, we don't have snow. You know what I mean? Right. They have one word, and there's one place in Vietnam that gets snow, and it's like the people that are more experienced with something have more of a reference and a language to kind of approach that. And that was one of the things that it's really interesting, because as you approach a song, what you as a mix engineer are going to be listening for is different than what a person might listen for. And though they might understand the vibe, the feeling, they're not able to kind of identify what that is, but you have to go in and identify that. And
right.
Was it hard for you to learn that language to identify things, to kind of really break things down?
I feel like I never really thought about it, like how you explained it, but now that you've explained it, looking back, I guess I did have to develop that over time. And it was like why is my kick drum not sounding like the same punchy way as this? And then that's where you train your ears to understand what is it that makes the kick drum sound like that. It could be simple as like the original sample just sounds way better than the sample you're working with, so you have to switch the sample. So sometimes you can't get it that way. You have to change the sample. But listening to little things like that and learning like what tools are needed to adjust them I guess that is a way of like training your ear to know like what to listen for in future songs and how it's achieved. So yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it.
That's awesome. Now, so you when did you start your own studio? When did that come together?
I think
After
like
college, you said you
that was the
Go ahead.
official like start where I got like my DBA and it was an actual business was I want to say
Nice.
2013. 2013, maybe early 2014, somewhere around there, I got the actual like business license. But before that, I think I started recording people in 2009 is when I first like started messing with everything.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, you grew up. Are you from Southern California originally?
Yeah, I was born in Covina and I live in West Covina right now, so I haven't gone far.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, does growing up in Southern California affect kind of like the music influences that you're seeing, or some of the vibe that people come in with?
Maybe I don't. I work with people all over the world, so like
That's cool then.
yeah. So I don't really have like
Then
the
let's
same.
circle in on that, because that's actually a more interesting thing. Have you seen that things have become more decentralized of late, and you're getting more people from all over because of YouTube and such, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, so like most of my clients are still in like the United States, some East Coast, some West Coast. So pretty much the main like hot spots for music is where a lot of the music comes from. But I
Mm-hmm.
do have like artists like in London or Germany or Australia or like just all over. So it just I feel like everything kind of I don't know, it's hard to say because like some people stick to their style and then other people like mix everything together. And sometimes it doesn't matter where they're at in the world. It's still like they're trying to achieve like what's popular in hip hop at the moment. So it varies a lot. It's very, very different. Like I have one artist that I am working with right now who he loves the old school hip hop sound to where we're adding vinyl noise. We're taking away the
That's
high
awesome.
end. We're making it very like boom bap style, like just it sounds completely different than what new hip hop sounds like. So taking a new recording and trying to achieve that old sound is our goal with his music. So it varies so much.
That's really awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's kind of a, there is such a difference in the different hip hop styles. Like you can
Mm-hmm.
look at a lot of genres have changed, but like the sounds of hip hop to me have really changed
Yeah.
between, you know, yeah, I mean, you can track all the way back to like the 70s into the 80s. It flows, and like you get that party type of hip hop from the 80s that was bright and happy,
Mm-hmm.
into the more like grittier stuff from Tupac and Biggie in the 90s.
Yeah.
Then you get like the Fugees that was just Fugees had that little bit of that like lo-fi sound, almost like you're listening to a record or something, so into more modern stuff that's all over the place. It's really cool,
Yeah.
man. Like, well, what is your favorite kind of vibe for the hip hop style and mixing style? What
I don't.
era was kind of like, are you vibing for?
Well, I mean, I feel
Go
like
ahead.
Dre was amazing. Like on his album, that 2001, the Chronic was like
Right.
uh, amazing, like sound quality. Like everything
Yeah.
just hits right. Everything sounds perfect mix wise. Like that was just like the best sound that you could
Yeah.
really achieve. And then nowadays, it's less a focus on like that quality, I think, and it's more of just like what's more in your face and like gonna capture your attention. Because there's some like of these songs off of like DJ Khaled's newer album that I'm just like, man,
Right.
that's so loud and like distorted sounding. But that's what people like apparently because it's like streaming high up on these playlists. And I'm just like, I'm not a fan of that sound. But that if somebody's like, hey, this is my reference track, then I'm like, all right, I guess I'm going to push this one like crazy. So yeah,
Interesting.
I kind of just go with whatever people want sound wise.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because again, you're providing a service and you're
Mm-hmm.
kind of working through. It's not but do your personal taste kind of slip into things at times? You
I like
find it kind of tricky.
Yeah, I
Good.
like to try to have my sound come through because, like, at the end of the day, it is there. I am doing a service for an artist, but if my name's on it, there's some things that I'm like, I really wish, like, I'll give people my opinion, and then they get to choose because it's their song. But I'll be like, hey, like, I know you wanted it like this, but here's another version where I think it sounds better. Just let me know which one you prefer. Usually they just go with the one that they like, but at least I give them that option to pick the one that I thought was better. So
yeah, right. Yeah, that's a good point, because it is your craft, it is your art, because it is the thing that you have your name on, which is a big deal, you know?
Yeah. And now, I mean, I feel like when you get to a certain level, though, like if you're Andrew Sheps or like one of these top mixing engineers, you're just going to be like, yeah, it's going to be this way or it's not going to happen type thing. I feel like, I feel like you could say like, I don't want my name on that if it's going to sound like that. So, but I don't think I'm ever going to get to that level, because that's not really my goal. So I think I'm stuck in the, whatever the artist truly wants is what's going to happen.
You never know, man. You never know, right? Now, what are some of your goals? What would you like to kind of put out there? What would you like to kind of accomplish? Do you want to keep moving more towards, teaching, or are you, what do you want to accomplish? What is it like that you would like to do?
I feel like I'm already doing what I want to do long term, but just
nice
on I don't know. Like I already work with artists I like, so that's great. I would love to work with more artists that I'll like their music too. I don't know. It's like I love teaching, but I wouldn't want to only do the like course side, because I feel like if I'm not doing the mixing regularly, then I don't have any new information to teach. So that's what I like, doing the actual craft that I'm teaching, so that I don't kind of like fall apart from it. So yeah, just pretty much the same thing, just balancing it with courses and mixing, just keeping that up.
Nice. Now, and like I saw, you're also a new dad.
Yeah.
And how have you found balancing, your family and your work? Is it hard for you, or is it easy?
Yeah, it's super hard. So it's like I don't want to have a babysitter, so that makes it even harder. So it's like my wife and myself taking care of the baby. It's either her or I. So when she goes to work, which is usually like she works normal hours during the day, so I'll watch the baby during the day. And then when she gets home, we'll like go through our normal routine of like eat dinner and this and that. And then when the baby goes to sleep, that tends to be when I do most of my work. So it's not the best schedule, but it's what's pretty much working right now.
Brother, that's what I did with my wife too. So I completely understand. It's like daddy goes to work at night.
Yeah.
Totally understand. But it has having a kid changed kind of like the way you approach your work at all? Or kind of just the way you go at things?
I mean, having a kid definitely puts more pressure on like you wanting to provide and doing all of that and making sure everything's set up. So I think it changes just like your entire life perspective to where it was a lot smoother. Like, oh, you don't really have to worry much about anything. And now it's like, all right, everything has to be done correctly. I need to think about long term. I need to be prepared and all this. So like, I think the financials of everything became a lot more serious than it used to be.
Right.
And that also leads to like wanting to work more but I don't know. It's like finding that balance of work and family life and all that. So it's a tough thing to figure out.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, as you go about teaching, what are some of the best, like what are some of the most successful videos that you put up on your channel?
Those two, that like setting up a home studio and the mixing vocals like a pro, or mixing a hip hop song like a pro. That was the catchy title that I tried to like get. And those did the best.
It worked.
Yeah, it worked. I think both of those videos have like over 1 million views now. So that was
Nice.
cool that it built up over time. They're still bringing in like ad revenue, which is cool. Unfortunately, the music space doesn't have as high of an ad revenue as like say personal finance that probably is like 10x the ad revenue for the same amount of views. So like that's one downside to the craft of audio. It doesn't pay as much for the ads, but it's just those videos really did well and brought in a lot of new people. And then lately, the biggest video has been like me doing a DistroKid video where I show how to upload a song on DistroKid so you could get it distributed.
That was one of the reasons I found you.
Oh, okay.
Because I was like, I was just like absolutely baffled with streaming, man. And for the longest time, I just was like overwhelmed because there's a lot of options too. Mm-hmm. And it's not that it's difficult, but there's a lot of moving parts. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
especially
so
like
it was really
after the streaming side of it, you have to think about like the royalty side of it, and that just so many people get so confused with it because there's so many different options, and that's why it's so confusing. Like I was super confused. Like I went to college and they taught about publishing, they taught about all this stuff in a class. That didn't help me at all. Like that did not stick. I've read the books and all that. That didn't stick because I feel like it's so outdated compared to what you're doing now.
Completely.
Yeah. So it's a different world. Like they talk about, oh, you go and get a big publishing contract and this and that. And I'm just like, that's not how you really do it now. Like now there's like the publishing administration that you usually go through that makes it a lot easier. They don't take a bunch of your percentage of your publishing and all that. So there's so much of a different route now that I called up BMI's publishing department. I was like, hey, can you explain this to me? And like the guy was super nice and sat there and just like explained a lot of the publishing side of things. And I was like, okay, cool. That makes more sense to me. And then it just helped me like kind of put things together and like make it not as difficult to understand that side of things.
Yeah. Do you have a YouTube video for people who might be tuning in that's like kind of a checklist for how to publish? We can add a link for that.
Yeah, I have an older video that was like based on royalties and how they kind of all go together. And I had like a whiteboard out and I wrote it all down. So I was like, all right, here's your song. It creates these royalties. These are like, you go with like either BMI or ASCAP or CSAC for collecting this royalty. And then there's like all kinds of different like stems to it. So yeah, that video can help kind of understand it a little bit more and see how all the pieces connect and how you could collect all your royalties. Yeah.
That's really great, man. Because people don't know. People know I want to get my music out there, but then, once your music's out there, are you making the money that you should be making? You know what I mean? Are you registering it at the right places? Because a ton of people don't know. And it used to be that the record companies would do it for you, but then they also had complete control over your music. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so that was the trade-off. And I mean, and so I think now with the as these companies have grown, TuneCore, CD Baby, and DistroKid, they've given people new options, but yet there's still places that people aren't aware of, and that's to me like the beauty of like people that are educating, because the beauty is that it's all about information. Like if people have enough information, they can make informed decisions, but they have to have that information.
Right.
So.
Yeah, like I think a lot of people, they get that distribution side of things. They're like, all right, cool, my song's out there, DistroKid's collecting my money for me, done. And it's like, well, you're not collecting money on any of the publishing side because DistroKid doesn't collect any publishing at all. So like you're just collecting that money that they get, but you're leaving all the other money on the table. So that's where like, okay, well, I'll sign up with BMI or ASCAP, and then, okay, you're collecting that. But what about if you get streamed in Germany? You need to be collecting from their associations as well. So that's why publishing administration is something that is going to help you get registered all over the world, collect from everywhere for the publishing side. So there's a lot of little moving parts to it.
Yeah, right. Do you have a company you prefer for the publishing administration? Or
yeah, I use Songtrust. I think they're great. And
as you go about making music for people, how do you approach you do mixing and mastering, right, for a track?
Yeah.
Okay. How do you approach your mastering?
So I know like people who specialize in mastering have this whole different setup and everything like that. And it's it's a lot more detailed and all that. But for me, it's just kind of part of the mix. And I don't really think of it as two separate things necessarily, but people like to have a name for it. So I call what I do on my mix bus mastering, and everything I don't do on my mix bus is my mixing. So that's where I guess you could call it the difference. But that's where I just like, I do the whole like get everything wider, get everything a little bit more polished. Like if you have to make big EQ changes or any type of change, then most likely you messed up in the mix. You should go back to the mix. But it's just those little tiny changes just to like, all right, it just needs a little bit of polish and a loudness, and then you're good to go. So that's what I think of mastering, is just, it's the polish at the end.
That's awesome. Now, I like that. It's the polish at the end. I really like that. Now, if you could go back and give some advice to your younger self, you go back, not changing anything. We're not going back trying to change the past. You did everything right. But what type of advice would you give your younger self?
There's a couple things that I would have told myself to stay at home instead of going out to a commercial space and renting it for a year and wasting the money when it made no difference, because I do a lot of stuff on my own. So I didn't necessarily need to spend that money, but I don't know. There's so many things that I learned from making mistakes that I don't know if I would want to change. Or like you said, you're not changing anything, just advice. That's a hard question. I don't know. Yeah, I really.
Well, let's say this. Well, how about, let me frame it a different way.
Okay.
For people who might be trying to get into your line of work, what type of advice would you give them?
Just be okay with making mistakes, because that's where you learn from, and don't be impatient, because it takes a while to like start getting to where you want to be with your work. Like it took me years and years and years to start making enough money to be like this, have my full-time job is mixing. So just being patient and sticking to it. Because if you do it for a year and you're like, oh, I'm not making enough, I'm going to give up. Well, you didn't give it enough time. Like the main reason that businesses fail is because people just gave up too early. So stick to it.
Right. There's that great cartoon that I always see, and it shows the one guy, the two people are digging down, and one guy found a small diamond, and it was just really near the surface. And then the other guy is in this deep hole, and you see right below the surface is this really big diamond, and he's like about ready to quit.
Yeah.
And it's like, don't quit. You got to keep going. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the best things, because certainly if you're not good at something, maybe you should rethink it, but you only get good at it if you practice. And, so you gotta really put in the time to get good at it, but then also put in the time once you get good at it to kind of refine it, Right.
And that's a thing, is like, if you're doing the same thing over and over, you're never going to get better at it. Like you have to learn new things and change things, because like my mixing process has changed a lot over the years. And I think it sounded, it's funny because every time I think I have it perfect, I end up like 2 years later, it's like, oh man, what was I thinking back then? Like now it's way better. And then 2 years later, I'm like, oh man, now it's even way better. Like, so you end up getting better as long as you're learning and you're not just doing the same thing. That's why I still watch like the Mix with the Masters. I love those videos to see how people approach things. And I always pick up a new technique, and sometimes I implement it, sometimes I don't, but it's nice to learn new approaches to things.
Right. And I think that like, that's the thing is, if you can recognize that there are things that you're not good at, and that's the thing, like we're in this big business, and the beauty is that it's become accessible to people, right? It used to be that if you wanted to become a musician, good luck. You had to go, you put in the time, and you hoped. I would remember stories from people back in the 60s and 70s, like we almost had that contract. We almost made it, but then we didn't. And then they had to go and, dude became, selling furniture or
Right.
working in the hardware store. And not that those are bad jobs, but they couldn't make it because it just was, if you didn't get signed, there was no hope. Versus now, there is this accessibility that's awesome in that people across the board have the ability to get access. But with that access is also this, it used to be with the recording studios, there were people who could, don't worry, we'll handle that for you. And they had their teams that would handle it. And now you have all of this great, this great ability to do stuff. But yet there's also this lack of information at times to how to get through certain steps. And it's not that it's difficult,
right?
But you just have to get that information, like, how to get a song up on DistroKid, how to get a song up, here, how to do your channel art. It's something that might seem simple, but it could be something that you get rejected on,
Right.
And it's like, those are things that it's really great that people are putting up tutorials. And that's what I love YouTube for, man. You can search anything.
Yeah.
How to make sourdough bread. There it is.
Yeah. I mean, I learned how to build that when I did have that commercial spot and I built a studio from scratch, I learned how to do it. Mostly, I did have one contractor friend that helped me with the ceiling because I didn't want it to collapse on me. But everything else, I learned on YouTube. I learned how to frame, like this studio I'm in right now. I built it from the knowledge that I had from learning stuff on YouTube, like how to frame up stuff and how to put the insulation, and like all of my walls. There's no drywall. It's just insulation behind fabric. So learning how to do all that was just pretty much YouTube.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's really awesome. And that's the beauty of what was it? When there's a will, there's a way, if you want to do something, enough, you can make it work.
Right.
I always loved, there was, one of the interesting things with Cuba, and not talking politics here, so don't worry. But one of the interesting things with Cuba is Cuba was kind of shut off from the world for a long time. So they had all those 1950s cars, right? And because there wasn't stuff being imported in and out, they had to keep them running. And so, if you go to Cuba now, you'll still see like a 57 Chevy and stuff, and people are driving these cars around still, and they just kept them going, kept repairing parts, kept putting things in. And because they had to. It was like ingenuity came from necessity. And that's one of the things I love nowadays is that, people want to be creating. And there's nothing that should be stopping you.
Yeah.
At all. There's all the tools out there to make it happen. It just seek out the people that can help you get there.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people, like you were saying, the quality wise and stuff, you definitely have to put in the time to learn some things along the way, or else you're going to be like, why does this sound terrible? What does this red mean when I'm recording? Like, you're clipping your track and it sounds terrible because it's distorting. It's literally flatlining. So learning how to avoid problems along the way, and then you're good. Once you know the basics of stuff, then you're solid. You could record as many songs as you want at home, make use of it, and it's awesome. So.
I love that, brother. I really appreciate that knowledge that you dropped on me today. I think that's awesome. And I'm glad, again, that this can be something that I can share with people that listen. Yeah. And I think that one of the reasons I started this podcast is because the idea is, I think we all deal with there's so much of a commonality between all of our stories. We all come and find our way in our journey. And I think when we can share those stories, it makes our own story more rich, and the people around us, hopefully can be inspired too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, man.